Some years ago, I was up early one morning. I put on a replays of some one and one program on Channel 2. The interviewer was a person I had never heard of before, but subsequently found out his name was Stan Grant. I watched him on this one-on-one program having his pity party on every episode with his part Aboriginal guests. They spend a lot of time bemoaning their imagined disadvantage of the past as they relish their current fantastic jobs that they would not have had but for the generosity of their fellow Aussies who encouraged them and paid for their education. They have had advantages granted before that of their fellow Aussies' own children. I'm quite frankly bewildered by their attitude. As I watched the way Sam drew the men always out towards the bad part of the fact that they were adopted or fostered by white people, every time they started to say something nice about their lives or something nice that had happened to them in their white world, he would draw them back to some little negative thing that they had said earlier. He couldn't bear it when they started to sound like they were happy persons or had had any good times in their lives. Why don't these activists ever talk about their white side, which is usually by far the larger part of their ancestry anyway? Why enhance their lesser genetic side? Because it's to their advantage, of course. Why is it then seen as such a crime by the "we were here first" brigade? They would have settled here in exactly the same way if positions had been reversed. It would have been inevitable. Since there are dozens of different Aboriginal languages, it is logical to assume that even these many tribes may have arrived at this great land at different times. So which tribe lays claim first? We Australians have been obliged to open our borders to dozens of different countries to enable them to send their oversupply of people to share Australia. If we didn't, forces would join together and come and take our country over anyway. How would Sam and his fellow whingers fare then? Last night at a beefsteak and burgundy dinner, we spoke about the grape growers on the overcrowded island of Jamaica, who with only half an acre of land each, grow the grapes and sell on the result. This result is a great port called Madeira, which we consumed at that meeting. I would think that these Portuguese people are very happy with their lives, sharing their small plots. How much better off are we? I mulled this over and compared that situation with my childhood, living in the South Australian country town of Cummins during the Great Depression, where my father owned the local bakery. My mother went down to the bank to draw out the wages for the staff one day, only to read a notice pinned on the door of the bank thus: "Sorry, no money." It never reopened. My father then lost his business. So Dad went fishing. "At least I will feed us," he proclaimed to Mum. I remember my two older brothers walking to school holding hands and crying because they had no shoes and the chilblains on their feet was stinging. I bet Stan Grant had shoes, and we were bullied. We were bullied because we were poor. He claims he was bullied because he was Aboriginal. Well, bullies will bully. They just find a reason. But despite us having no shoes, we were happy. We had no idea that we were disadvantaged until we went to school and saw the other children had shoes while we were barefoot. I was despised by those same pupils, and they bullied me, and my life was a misery, as mentioned in earlier comments about Stan's activism. I never told my mother about the bullying. Why? Probably because I instinctively knew that she was overburdened, and being told about my bullying would worry her and cause her even more distress. The teacher favoured those girls that bullied me. He did nothing, as he boarded with one of their families and later married one of those farmers' daughters. I mention this only because the likes of Stan have been so privileged. In their ignorance of our Australian history, they don't realise that fact. Why is our history not taught in schools as it once was? All Stan is doing is creating racism where none exists. Governments keep trying to appease his ilk. Maggie Thatcher said appeasement never works. Likewise, Winston Churchill, who said appeasement is feeding a crocodile hoping that it will eat you last. How then do our governments spend time over and over appeasing? After I'd watched that dreadful episode with Stan, I was so put off. I actually sat down and wrote a scribe about it and thought I would get it out there somewhere, but I was busy and I let it slide, as you do. But then, a year or two later, I saw Stan again on Four Corners. Well, I had never seen a more self-pitying exhibition than the tissue of lies he told on that Four Corners program. It might not have occurred to Stan that as there are well under 1 million persons claiming to be Aboriginal in Australia and 24 million others, that by the law of averages there should be less black people than white with nicely played jobs in television. So he misrepresented this, and it was a deliberate lie, as was much of his sorry tale. Stan himself, by his own admission, is more white than black. His mother's white, his wife is white, yet he emphasises and speaks only of his black heritage. Any thinking person would work out that his stance is taken for political advantage. The eerie intonation in his voice was so well staged. The chap who sang the miserable song about being torn from his mother's breast. Oh, there were many programs in earlier days of television when reporters were more likely to report the actual facts, and in which the then white-appointed protectors of the Aboriginals clearly stated that only neglected, disease-ridden, malnutritioned, and often abandoned half-caste children were taken to rescue them from certain death. It was only when activists persuaded Aborigines to take the stance that they were stolen, an attitude taken purely for political reasons, that myth perpetuated and is now universally believed. Even as recently in the 1970s, an army officer told me of seeing Aboriginal children with head lice and living in filthy conditions. But authorities no longer take steps to rescue them these days because of the accusation of stolen children. Stan went on and on about black girls being trained for housemaids as if it was something evil. Well, I've got news for you, Stan. So were we white girls. It was an honourable occupation in the days when people had large families with no modern amenities, such as dishwashers and washing machines, when the duties in the households were done the arduous way. How sad that so few of us have the courage to state what we are really thinking, because the fear of retribution and ridicule by people of Stan's ilk. At least in the ballot box we can express our honest opinion. So, Stan, you really convinced no one except your activist left-wing mates. Thank you.